Hi friends, welcome to WafaStudies YouTube channel. From this video, we are going to start a new playlist called Azure REST APIs. That means in this entire playlist, I am going to discuss about how to make different REST API calls when you are working with different Azure resources. For example, when you are working with Data Factory, and let's assume you have a pipeline and you want to run that pipeline, then we can either run it from the UI, that means by opening a browser, or you can make a REST API call as well. So you can identify the REST API for the same. It will be available in the documentation, and you can make that REST API to run your pipeline. So not only Data Factory, with any Azure resource, whatever you have, if you want to do something programmatically, you don't want to do it via browser, then one best way is finding a API for that particular task and running that particular API to make sure your task will get performed correctly. So we are going to discuss that kind of various different APIs in this entire playlist. The first video will be focusing on to make any REST API call for any resource, right? The first step will be we have to get the access token for the service principal. So usually flow will be something like this. So usually you will be having something called service principal, and service principal is nothing but like a identity in the Azure. So that service principal will be having a access on the Azure resource. Okay. So what is Azure resource means? Let's say this is Azure resource. So let's say ADF is one Azure resource. Synapse is one Azure resource. Anything for any Azure service, if you create a resource, that is called Azure resource. So now generally, right, if you want to do any kind of a task on any Azure resource, programmatically mainly, you will create a service principal. Service principal is nothing but like identity, as I said, like our ID will be like one identity. Same way service principal is one identity, imaginary identity, think that way. And that identity, we will take it and go to the Data Factory and try to grant permissions for that identity there. So once you have for permissions, then using this identity, you can do any job on the Data Factory service. For example, service principal has permissions on the Data Factory. Then using that service principal, I can run the pipelines. I can create a pipeline. I can do different tasks. What I can do via UI. So the same thing is possible even here. So now the question comes like how to do that, right? So there are various ways. We can write our own C# code. We can write our own Python code. Similarly, you can make the API call as well. And when you want to make a API call, you should tell that take this service principal, and with that service principal, make a API call to run the pipeline like that. So when you are doing that entire thing, right, simply giving the service principal to the API and asking API to run the pipeline will not work actually. So you need to provide something called access token first. So one has to generate the access token, and that access token we have to give to the API to run the pipeline. So this video will be focusing on how to generate that access code at the first phase for the service principal. So once you have the access code, with that access code and with that service principal, you can do any kind of job on any Azure resource. Okay. So let's try to understand how to make or generate the access token for the service principal first. So to explain you this, right, so firstly we should have a service principal, and let's try to give that service principal some permissions on the Synapse, and then try to generate access token for it. Okay. So what I am going to do now is, so let me minimize everything and let me go to the browser. Now this is my Azure portal, and here to open any service principals, here simply search like app registrations. Okay. So when you navigate to this app registrations, and inside this app registrations, you see your own owned app registrations here. Okay. So you see them, right? So now from this app registrations, right, you can see here, right, you can easily see it here, right? So we have totally three app registrations, I mean three service principals already available. And if you see the status, they are all expired at this point of time. That means the password is expired. So what I am going to do now, so maybe I want to use this Mahir service principal, Mahir SP. You can see the name there, right? So using this service principal, what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a password for this, because service principal is nothing but like a ID and password. Imagine that way. Then this particular service principal should have permission on my Synapse workspace because I wanted to do something in a Synapse, maybe getting the status of the integration runtime in the Synapse. So first thing is this service principal should have a password, and this service principal should have that particular access on the Synapse. Then we will take a service principal and make a API call to get the token. Then with that token, we will try to make the API call to the Synapse. So these all steps we will do. So service principal we have. So let's do one thing. So let's go to certificates and secrets. And here, let's try to click this new client secret. That means I'm creating a password. I'm creating a secret. So let's say testing. This is like a expiry. Hit this add button to create the secret for the service principal. Now if you see whatever you are seeing it here, this is the password actually. So we have to copy this. So let me copy this and I will try to keep it in one in notepad. So let me open a notepad and I will try to keep that in a notepad separately somewhere else. Okay. So I just kept it somewhere else. Okay. So now I have the password and the things ready with me. So now what I wanted to do is let me try to give this service principal access on the Synapse, then try to generate the access token for the service principal. So this is the Synapse workspace, and on this Synapse workspace to give the access, of course you guys know that we have to go to this access control menu, and then when I go into the access control menu, then you see you can click this check access button to check the access of anything. So whoever has any access. So what is my service principal name? It is Mahir SP. So let me search for that, and when I click this service principal, you can see that right now there are no roles assigned for my service principal. So what I'm going to do now? So I'm going to click this add button here. So let me close this. Click this add button, add role assignment, and here I am going to, okay, let's take this contributor role under privileged administration roles. Contributor, next, select the members. So this is where like I want to give this contributor role for the member called Mahir SP, which is a service principal. So I will simply search here like Mahir SP, and I will get my service principal. Then below hit that select button. So then simply click this review plus assign. This is going to assign contributor role for my subscription for my service principal on the Synapse workspace. Okay. So let me add this particular assignment here. So when this is happening, now technically what happened, now my service principal whatever I have, that have permissions on my Synapse to do any kind of job. Okay. So maybe I wanted to make a API call to the Synapse that will tell me the status of the integration runtime. So but first thing, as I said, to use any service principal, one has to generate the access token first. So let's try to generate the access token first for the service principal, and let's try to understand how to do that. So for that, of course, in these entire tutorials, I may use the Postman software. Like Postman is a client that will help you to make the API calls. Many people who work with APIs, they know this thing. So let's go to this Postman, and inside the Postman, I am going to make the API calls that will help you to get the access token for the service principal first. Okay. So let's wait for the Postman to load it here. Let me click that allow button to open the Postman. And meanwhile, right, so if I go back to the presentation, when the Postman is loading, you see this to make the service API call, which will help you to get the access token. You have to make the API call for this URL: https login.microsoftonline.com/. Then here you should use the tenant ID of your subscription, then auth2/token. So this is the entire URL one has to type. So what I am going to do, I am going to start typing this, and then we have to make a post request, and then if you see under headers, you need to use this content type header, and you have to use this value for the content type header. So let's try to do all these things and then make the API call to get the access token. So what I am going to do now, so let me go to the Postman, and here let me create a new collection, blank collection. Okay. And I am going to rename this collection. I can right click and I can scroll down. I can rename this collection to maybe Azure APIs videos. So that's the collection name. Think like folder name. Click that add request. That's where you can add the request and make the API calls. So now if you remember, we have to make a post request as I said, and to which URL you have to make a request. It is https login. So we have to use for the login.microsoft.com, and here we have to use our own tenant ID. So how to get the tenant ID of my subscription? Navigate to your Azure subscription and simply search the tenant properties. So when I click the tenant properties, under tenant properties, I should see my tenant ID. So you can see this is my tenant ID. Let me copy that and let me post it here. So once I have my tenant ID, then okay, my URL is ready, and for my API I am telling a post request. Then navigate to the headers. Under headers we have to use the content type header. So search for the content type header. Okay, and value for this header will be application. So we need to use this application, not JSON, application slash x slash ww form URL encoded. So that is the content type to use. So overall, use a tenant ID in the API URL. Make sure it's a post request. Then use this particular content type under the headers section. So once all that is done, when I hit this send, it should get me the access token. But before doing that, we need to do couple of things as well. So not only providing the content type, under body, see body means request body. So we are making a request, and whenever we are making a request, in the request header, I am telling to send the content type, and then in the request body, I should use this form URL encoded one, because if you remember, that's the content of the header or content of the request. So in the body also you need to select this form URL encoded thing, and here you have to pass couple of key values. So first thing is there will be something called grant underscore type. So this key we should pass, and value for this key should be client underscore credentials. So remember this value we have to use as it is when you want to work with the APIs with Azure resources. Okay, to get access token that will help you to work with the Azure resources. Okay, and then the second key we should use it is client underscore key. Okay, client underscore ID. Then what is the client ID? So if you go back to client ID means your service principal. So go back to app registrations, and go to your service principal and copy that service principal ID. So Mahir SP, right? So that's the service principal name, and you see there is a client ID. Copy this. Then go to the postman and paste your client ID. Then the second another thing, what another key what we have to use is client secret. So if you remember, we have already copied the client secret. So let me copy the client secret and let me paste it here. So this is a client secret. Then the last thing is there should be something called resource key. Here I should use the URL uh, that will actually get me the access tokens for the purpose what I want. The purpose what I want is I want to work with Azure resources, and I want to work with the APIs which will help me to work with Azure resources. So that means the token what I get, it should be capable enough to do task on the Azure resources via APIs. So for that the URL to use it management.azure.com. So whenever you want to get the access tokens that will help you to work with Azure resources, you have to hit this particular URL management.azure.com URL. So all set. So what we did, we added a URL with a tenant ID, we selected a method as a post, and we gave all this request body and this client credentials, grant type, resource URL, and client ID, client secret, that means service principal ID, service principal value, everything we have to give under one second. So everything we have to give under form URL encoded. So we are almost pretty much okay with all the request formation in the postman. Now when I hit this send key, it should get me the access token. If you see here, I am able to get the access token successfully. You see token type key expires so many other things, but this is the access token. From here to here, all this entire thing is access token basically. So this is how you will get a access token. And if you see this, I added it here, right? I can right click this request and save it as well for my future purpose in the Postman. So let me right click. So let me click here, let me right click and let me rename. So let me select get access token. So that's the name I will give. And let me hit Control S to save this. I saved it. So now I have access token, right? So now, as I said, let's try to make an actual API call that will work with the Azure Synapse resource, because for the service principal, I already gave the permissions on the Synapse workspace. So let me click this new and add request at the collection level. And if I go to this documentation, you can see this is completely API related documentation. You can search it in Google, that Azure REST API documentation, you will get that. So it will have every service related API details. Okay, so every service related. So in my case, it's a Synapse. If I scroll down, I am already inside the Synapse and I opened a API. See, you can see here I am already inside the Synapse, and then I opened a page where it is explaining me about the API that will help to get the status of the integration runtime. Okay, so what it is telling, you have to make the post request to this entire URL to get the status of the integration runtime. So if I copy this and if I go back to Postman, so firstly let me make it a post request. That's what the documentation says, and I copy pasted. If you see, it is asking me to give the subscription ID here, and then resource group name, and then the Synapse workspace name here, you see here, and then the integration runtime name. Then it will get me that status of the integration runtime. So let's navigate here and let's navigate to the home in the Azure portal. Let me open my Synapse workspace. The first thing what they want is subscription ID. Copy the subscription ID, go back to the Postman and paste the subscription ID here. Then once it is done, we have to give the resource group name. So where to find the resource group name? This is one. So copy the resource group name and paste that resource group name also here. Okay. So I pasted it. Then we have to give the workspace name. So what is the workspace name? If you see, this is the workspace name. Copy the workspace name and then paste the workspace name into this placeholder. Okay, then we have to give the integration runtime for which I have to get the status. So let me open this Synapse Studio workspace, and then there is a integration runtime. We will try to get the status of that integration runtime. So let's wait for this particular workspace to load it here, and once it loads, we are going to navigate to the management menu inside the workspace, and then we are going into the integration runtimes to copy that integration runtime name and use it in our request. Okay, so let's wait for this particular, yeah, I think screen got loaded. So let me go to the management menu, and then under the management menu I am going to the integration runtimes, and I should have integration runtime called auto resolve integration runtime, and if you see, the status is running only, that means it is active. So let me copy the integration runtime name, let me go to the Postman and let me paste it here. So we pasted the integration runtime. So what and all, we give the service principal, we gave the resource group name, we gave the Synapse workspace name, we gave the integration runtime name. Once all this is done, okay, once all this is done, what we have to do it is, we have to go to the headers. So go to the headers, and here we have to use couple of headers called tenant type. So all this whatever I am doing for this API, it will be documented in this API documentation as well. So you can either follow this or completely watch this video. So content type, here I should use content type as application slash JSON. Then the value, the another key is authorization. Okay, so authorization, so here I have to use the token, the token what I got. So I have to use it like barrier space then the token. So if I go here, this is where I got the token, right? So let me copy this entire token from here to here, Control C. Then let me go back to this new request and let me paste it after the space. So I gave it. Now let me rename this, right click and rename this particular new request as get IR status in Synapse, right? So I will say Synapse. Okay. So that is done. We gave the token. So in the first step, we got the access token for the service principal. Why? Because that service principal have the permissions on the Synapse. Now we identified the API for the Synapse that will help me to get the IR status, and I am making a service I mean API call using that access token. So let me hit send now. This should make the API call and get me back the response. Okay, so I think there is some error here. It is telling that I could not make the request. So let me go back to the author parameters. Looks fine. Header application slash JSON author could not send the invalid protocol HTTPS. Oh, okay. See the URL. We have to remove this post thing. So the URL was incorrect. So now the URL is fine. So let me hit this send to make the API call. This should get me the response back. Okay, so there is some error. Okay, the URL looks like incorrect here. Let me quickly check what is the error in the URL. Okay, it looks there is a space here. So let me remove the space. Okay, yeah, now it is good. Now let me hit this send to make the API call. So remember I gave the, you can see this clearly. Now I got the status online. That means I am able to make the API call for the Synapse resource, and Synapse resource is able to respond me back saying my IR is active. The same thing I can do it by manually navigating to the resource as well, like how I navigated in the browser. But in real time, in many projects, you may end up with a needs to make the API call programmatically to get it what it is, like how to make that particular, like what is the status of the IR, what maybe before running the pipeline every time you want to make sure IR status is good, then only run the pipeline. So you will write a program that will make a REST API call to check the status of the IR, and then you will write another piece of code that will actually run your pipeline in the Synapse workspace, right? So REST APIs can do anything. So we have to, whatever the task you want to do in a particular Azure resource, go to that resource and try to find the API for it, and then generate the access token like how I did it, and then start making the API call. So that's how in real time the things will work. Okay. So I hope you got it. So we taken a URL, we gave the access token, and we got the access token by doing this API call to the tenant, and under headers. If you remember under headers, what we did, content type application slash URL encoded, and then under the body we used grant type, client credentials, resource management.azure.com, then service principal ID and service principal secret. That will get us the access token. So this is how you will get the access token for the REST APIs. And one more thing, the beauty about the Postman is once you make the API, this is like via third party tool I am doing. Maybe you want to do the same thing in the Python. Then the beauty about it is, right, you can click this code icon for the same API call, and then if you select here in the drop down Python, right, different languages you can select. If you select Python language here, then you will get the entire code for you. You can simply copy paste this code into a console, into a IDE where you write a Python development, and that will make your job. So any like different languages, right? So everything is possible here. So that's why you even the C sharp code is available for you, right? So you can simply copy paste the code, make the API call from the Postman, and copy the programming code and use it if your intention is to write the code. So I hope you enjoyed in this video. So if I navigate to the next slide, it is the same thing. So add this all the key values in the access token related API call to get the access token. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please consider hitting the like button and hitting the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel as well. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.